Welcome to the Silver Divorce Podcast, where we offer advice, stories, and support for people age 50 plus who are considering or who are facing divorce. I'm Lisa.
And I'm Pat. And sometimes we refer to this as gray divorce as well.
Right. Today, we are going to take a deep dive into the legal process and how it works in Tennessee. But first, let us say we are not attorneys.
Yes.
And
we're not counselors.
No, you will want to seek your own legal advice. Mm-hmm. What we are two people who have been through the process, who Pat has spent 20 years facilitating divorce care. We've done a lot of research, in-depth reading, and gaining knowledge on the legal process in Tennessee to help make it a little bit easier for you as you are going through the process.
Yes, we're here to help you all get some perspective and some direction.
I like to say, you know, those old V8 commercials. I wish I would have had a V8. You know, I wish I had known a lot of this early on in my divorce process, because things would have gone a lot smoother and it would have saved me a lot of stress and near heart attacks.
Oh, yeah.
So we're here to help and bring that to you. So
absolutely.
Let's just dive in and talk about how does it work in Tennessee. If you're thinking about divorce, the legal process is pretty straightforward. There are really two ways to get a divorce in Tennessee. One is a contested divorce, and the other is a non-contested divorce. And the divorce process for a contested divorce is a very lengthy process. You'll need to prepare yourself for a marathon. It can be 9 to 12 months or longer in those contested divorce cases. My divorce was 10 and a half months, and I was told that was very quick. But in an uncontested divorce, it's generally 60 days. You cannot get divorced before 60 days if you do not have kids. If you have kids, it's 90 days, and you are required to attend a 4-hour parenting class, and that's minor children. Let me say that. So, what's the difference? Well, in a uncontested divorce, the couple will come together. They will agree on the division of assets. You'll develop what is called a marital dissolution agreement. That agreement goes before a judge to be signed, and then you're divorced. And typically, you'll have an attorney to help you, maybe a CPA to help you if your assets are complex, or another accountant to help you as well. But contested divorce is a whole nother ballgame. A contested divorce is really where the parties have not reached agreement on how to settle the issues. And they can be a range of mild issues, or it can be very severe. If you think about the movie War of the Roses with Michael Douglas.
I remember that.
Where they couldn't agree on if he can't have it, nobody can have it, and they destroyed everything in the process, and they ended up hanging from the chandeliers. Those are considered severe cases of contested divorce. And there are two events in life that will bring out the biggest amount of greed in people. One is death, and the other is divorce.
That's right.
So in contested divorces, the state of Tennessee does require mediation. And that's really where your length of time comes into play. If you think about it, my attorney said they will typically do 8 to 10 mediations a week. So
that's a lot.
That is a lot of mediations. And to get on the mediation schedule, it just takes time. And then there are many legal steps like discovery that come into play that lengthen that. If you want to think about what's the most costly way to get divorced, it's a contested divorce where you're spending a lot of time fighting over assets.
Yeah.
And the more you fight and the more filings there are, the more the legal fees go up as well. So there are specific grounds for contested divorce in Tennessee. And let's just go through those real quickly. There's, of course, adultery. There is bigamy, which that's where you are already married. Oops, I forgot. I never got divorced from wife number one. There's also being impotent or incapable of procreation at the time of the marriage, and you didn't share that with your spouse. There is, if you've been convicted of a felony and sentenced to a penitentiary, habitual drunkenness or abuse of drugs. And that is, perhaps you married somebody who was sober and then suddenly they decided to start drinking or they started using drugs. That is a ground for a contested divorce. There's also living apart for 2 years. If you don't have any children, you've lived apart, they will grant a contested divorce on those grounds. Being legally separated. You maybe went to an attorney, you were granted a legal separation, but after 2 years you still haven't come to any agreements. You can get a divorce based on those grounds. There's also desertion. Somebody left with no cause. They just one day exited the house. A year later, you can get a divorce on those grounds. Or perhaps you moved to Tennessee for a job and your spouse just said, I'm not going to follow you. After 2 years, you'll be granted a divorce. Kicking the spouse out. If you kicked your spouse out and that spouse perhaps was a stay-at-home mom, never worked, didn't have any means to support herself, then that's grounds for divorce. My favorite one, pregnant by another man.
I think that's grounds.
As well as attempting the life of the spouse or trying to poison them.
Yeah.
That's also grounds. But there is one that is commonly cited in contested divorce filings. My attorney told me that in 80% of the cases, this is cited and it's called other inappropriate marital conduct or marital misconduct. And if you receive those grounds in a divorce filing, you will explode and hit the roof because you will think, what did I do? You think it means you've done something drastically wrong to be cited with marital misconduct. Mm-hmm. But it is just a very common tactic. And marital misconduct is the intentional act of eroding marital harmony. So what does that mean? Well, it runs the gamut. If you refuse sex, or if your husband refused to buy you clothes, you can cite that as marital misconduct. Emotional affairs fall into that. There was one case in Tennessee where a woman cited her husband was on the phone with another woman for 2 hours a day, at least, and they weren't having a physical affair, but they were having an emotional affair.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah. The silent treatment. Do you have a spouse who every time your spouse gets mad, they go out to their garage or down to their man cave and they don't talk to you for 3 days?
Yeah, just shut down.
That's considered marital misconduct. And, why do they cite things like that in a contested divorce? Well, Tennessee is an equitable distribution state, which generally means 50-50. But if they can prove a specific ground that's mentioned above, the judge can look favorably on the harmed party. So a judge can say, well, I'm going to grant 60-40 because, you're guilty of this particular ground. But they have to prove it. Mm-hmm. And adultery, I'm told, is very hard to prove because you have to practically hire a PI, follow that person around and get photographic evidence of them together. Costly. But marital misconduct is a broad range. So if you are able to go before a judge and you can prove any of these things, then you could be looked at more favorably in the division of assets.
Yeah.
Typically what happens, though, because Tennessee's a mandatory mediation state, they'll work out the agreement. Only about 2% of cases in Tennessee actually make it to trial. If they're not worked out in mediation, there's pretrial conferences. A lot of times cases get settled in those pretrial conferences. And then the final divorce decree typically will state irreconcilable differences.
Well, there's the question, can you divorce without an attorney and mediation. In limited, very limited circumstances, yes, couples can get an agreed divorce without an attorney. Now, for me personally, in all the years I've been doing divorce care, in my experiences, this is very rare. I know of one couple that did this. They were married for 20 years. They decided to get divorced and agreed to whatever they wanted out of the divorce. They got their forms online, filled them out, got them legalized, turned in, and it worked for them. They went through that process, and it, like I said, it worked out for them. And I got to tell you, this is extremely rare. This just rarely happens. Like I said, I just know of one instance that done that. Lisa, what about the first step in filing a complaint for divorce?
You know, it's really a hard decision for people to make when a couple is discussing their issues. You know, maybe they're not getting along, somebody's unhappy. A lot of times people will wait. They're not quite ready to file yet. But the first step really is the complaint for divorce. Mm-hmm. And then that usually leads to a summons being served on the other party. The person filing the complaint is called a plaintiff, and then the person being served is called a defendant. And when you get that filing, if you are the defendant, many times that first complaint for divorce will be what I call a scorched earth filing.
That's right.
It will say, I want the house, I want the possessions, I want the car, I want the bank accounts, and you can have the debt and you can pay the attorney's fees.
Oh, how generous.
Mm-hmm. And that's very common, I found out. When you get a filing like that, you will go through the roof. And it creates so much stress and anxiety. But just know that that is a very common tactic used by attorneys. I call it a bullying tactic.
It is.
When you get it, you're not sure, is this the attorney? Is this my spouse? Who's driving this? But it's very common. And what I've learned is that attorneys use it as a starting point. You know, if we ask for the stars and the moon and the sky, the other party will be so quick to settle that they'll settle for much less than what they should get because of how we approached it to begin with.
Well, Lisa, what about who should file first? Is there advantages or disadvantages to that?
Yeah, there are advantages to filing first, but let me step back for a second, though, and talk about there is what comes with a complaint for divorce, and that's the certificate of divorce. And that certificate of divorce has statistical facts about you. It'll have your Social Security number, your date of birth, where you're married, your place of marriage. I just wanted to caution people to look that over very carefully. In my complaint for divorce, out of 7 statistical facts about me, 5 were wrong, and that follows you through the court system. It always irritated me when I received a new filing that my name would be wrong, and even in my final divorce decree, my name is wrong. So just make sure anything that you get, read very carefully. So should you file first? Well, there is an advantage to being the one to file first.
Absolutely.
And the reason being is that it's said the person who files first controls the process. Mm-hmm. And when you file first and you are the plaintiff, then typically, if it is a contested divorce, an injunction is issued with that complaint for divorce. And that means that injunction prohibits the other person from selling things, from entering into contracts, from excessive spending. You know, I know of a case of a woman who her husband had a lot of very expensive golf equipment. You know, we're talking $1,000 golf clubs.
Oh, yeah.
She put everything out on the front lawn and sold it for $1. And people, like I said, when it comes to death and divorce, those are the things that trigger greed. And the injunction that's issued with the complaint for divorce will prevent that other person from doing those nasty kind of things. But also, the plaintiff issues discovery first. So the person, you are then in charge of the other party getting the discovery. And we're going to talk about discovery because it can be a very lengthy document.
Yeah.
My discovery was 12 pages long.
Wow.
I submitted over 300 documents.
Wow.
And you don't want to be necessarily the person doing that. But finally, the other reason you want to be the one to file first is that if it should go to trial, you get to present your case first.
Mm-hmm.
So you get to be the one to possibly make a favorable impression on the judge and plead your case first. And that's important. So,
well, you've also, and I know I spoke about this in the initial podcast, but you're going to have to get, if you've been served and you weren't the first one, you've got to get a hold of your emotions. And it's going to be a traumatic experience, especially if you've been blindsided. Get yourself a solid attorney. And as I've said before, do not sign off on anything. I can't mention that enough. Don't let them manipulate or bully you. And you can keep your power and set your boundaries. And if you've never done that before, well, this is the time to learn how to do that. You're going to have to stand strong, because I know this is a tremendous heartbreak, deep hurt, betrayal, confusion. That's why, Lisa and I are here. We want to help you all with that.
and that goes back to just because your spouse says it's true doesn't make it true.
That's right.
There was a woman I was speaking to yesterday who said her spouse and his mistress said they were coming to get her ring, her engagement ring and her marriage ring. And, you need to know that, no, that doesn't happen. You can put your foot down and say no. Just because they say they want something doesn't mean it's true. So,
that's right. Personally, I know of a woman that came through divorce care. She was actually married to a doctor here in Chattanooga. She came through divorce care 3 times in a row. The first time, all she could do was cry. She was completely devastated. That's why I can't say enough about getting a hold of your emotions, because like Lisa has stated, it's going to be like a business transaction. This is your future and your life you're talking about. You've got to get a hold of yourself.
if you think about in divorce, women lose about 43% of their income.
That's right.
And men, it's about 21%. So typically the woman is the one to struggle after a divorce. So you want to make sure that you can have a fair agreement that gets you your share of the assets.
And manage your life and your kids' life if necessary.
That's right.
Well,
So,
Lisa, who pays for the divorce?
well, that's a bit of a negotiation. What I've learned about the state of Tennessee is that they look at who is the highest earner. If there is one spouse who is earning, 5 times more than the other spouse, then they will ask the higher earning spouse to pay for both attorneys. But if it's a case where both incomes are relatively equal, then typically both people pay for their own attorney's fees.
Yeah.
So, that's why it's really important. If going into it, you might end up paying your own attorney's fees.
Yeah.
Managing your attorney and how you communicate with your attorney, what you end up paying for, what you're fighting over is huge.
Mm-hmm.
You might be fighting over an asset that's $100 and it cost you $450 in attorney's fees.
That's right.
For them to go back and forth.
Yeah, anytime you pick up the phone, email, whatever, they're going to charge you for it.
Right. Typically, you will pay a retainer when you secure your attorney. It averages here between $3,000 to $5,000 for a retainer, and then you are charged in quarter-hour increments at about either $350 an hour or $450 an hour.
Wow.
So every email they open, every phone call they make, every time you stop in the office, you're going to be charged. So it does, you do want to make sure that you are managing it very smartly.
Yes.
And like I said before, it's, as much as possible, manage it like a business deal. And,
That's right.
And try to put your emotions to the
That's
side.
right.
And look at it as, I need the best outcome for my future, for the future of my children, if you still have children in the home, and the best home environment for them.
This is when you've got to stand in your power again and set boundaries. What
That's
to
right.
expect on our next podcast, upcoming podcast?
Oh, yeah. We are going to talk about what happens when the complaint is filed.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about discovery. You might have heard about discovery, but how do you handle that? And what is the best way? What do you have to answer? And what do you not have to answer? Like many things, I tell people, just because they ask doesn't mean you have to tell.
Right.
And we'll do a deep dive into that as well.
Right.
We invite you to email us, to go onto Facebook, ask questions.
Yeah.
We plan to have guests on to answer your questions.
Yes.
If we don't know, we're going to find out. We want to make sure that you are going through this process with the power of knowledge.
That's right. We're here to help you walk through that. And that's all we have for today. Join us next time.
And thank you for joining the Silver Divorce Podcast.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.